All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for another excellent interview. There have been a lot of developments that have happened over the last couple of days with the recent Epstein files. Roughly about 3 million or more documents have dropped on the Department of Justice website. They cover various topics. Obviously, the trafficking ring is a huge area of focus for a lot of people. I myself am personally more interested in like the financial investments, the scientific developments, and things like that. It's come to light that Epstein was way more involved with the early startings of various crypto projects. And today I have with me somebody that was recommended to me by Indy, a fan of the channel. We have Aaron Day. Aaron, I checked out some of your work on the recommendation of Indy. You and I seem to see pretty much eye to eye. I was even trying to like play devil's advocate a little bit, but you're calling out Tether, you're calling him out the Bitcoin hijacking, the digital currency system that's coming, and where you kind of sort of differ from a lot of the crypto space, especially with like some of the veterans that I've seen and stuff, is that uh, you are against the Genius and the Clarity Act and the things that are sort of coming with that, the big beautiful bill, digital ID, and the tokenization of everything that's kind of being pushed by Larry Fink and BlackRock. So I know that you have your projects that you've been trying to educate people about. You have your Technocracy Atlas, which I'd love to check out at some point here today, and you have some nonprofit organizations as well, sort of helping to educate people on these various dangers and ways to sort of make themselves more independent and free themselves from this financial system. So thank you so much for joining me, Aaron, and appreciate you giving us your time today.
Oh, thank you for having me. And yeah, no, this is an important topic. I've actually been focused for the last 3.5 now 4 years solely on warning people about CBDCs, which then expanded into technocracy. Once I started to understand what technocracy is all about, that central bank digital currencies are just part of a plan to put in place essentially a global, surveillance system.
Mhm.
And governance model where essentially we give up our free will. I mean, it's essentially a model where using digital currency, you end up with a social credit system with AI surveillance. And the whole theory of technocracy is that we're too stupid to make decisions for ourselves, and we need scientists and engineers to make all of those decisions for us. Which is I know you cover technocracy, so your audience is probably already aware. This is an ideology that's been around since the 1930s.
Yeah.
And so I literally put everything on hold. And part of it is motivated by the fact that some friends of mine were targeted by the federal government that were in crypto, that were at the intersection of liberty and crypto.
Oh, wow.
And they were in early, like 2010. So,
Mhm.
for instance, Ian Freeman, who I learned about the Free State Project from and so forth in New Hampshire, he's in federal prison right now for 8 years for selling Bitcoin without a license, even though he had an opinion letter from an attorney stating he didn't need a license.
Yeah.
And then Roger Ver,
Mhm.
who I learned about Bitcoin from, he had his ordeal where he was arrested in Spain and was basically facing a life sentence in prison. Which I had interviewed him just 3 weeks prior to his arrest. He had just published a book called Hijacking Bitcoin. And now that we see the Epstein files and what we've learned about Tether and everything else, to me, it's pretty obvious that they wanted to silence him at a very important time while they were promoting what I call hijacked surveillance Bitcoin and then now Tether.
Okay. Absolutely. And I think that when you kind of zoom out and you see the big picture, like with digital ID and the AI injection of of Palantir essentially and other AIs into government, the partnerships with big tech, Microsoft, Nvidia, things like that. Oracle is a huge one as well. I kind of see where it's heading, and I am trying to scream it from the rooftops like, hey guys, this is the digital currency that 20, 30 years ago I was hearing about. Like, that's going to be the one of the last nails in the coffin here. Now I'll say, when cryptocurrency first started, I think I had heard about Bitcoin in 2011, and it wasn't until like 2012 that I actually figured out like how to use it. And I was using it to like dabble in the Silk Road. Then they took the Silk Road down, and I got away from that because it became this huge FBI honeypot. And then kind of got away from Bitcoin, started dabbling in like meme coins and stuff during COVID. And then that's when I learned about what technocracy is, sold all of my positions, deleted all of the wallets off of my all of my devices. And I know they're still out there somewhere on the blockchain. But since I'm warning, like, I think it's sort of like a zero tolerance thing. Like, I don't think that we're going to be able to create something like that that isn't co-opted or coerced or infiltrated in some sort of way. And I would love to go back to the barter system. I know it's sort of a pipe dream, but that's where I am as far as my position. How did you sort of come into this crypto space and become familiar with it and things like that? What's your journey been?
I mean, the journey is I started out as a serial entrepreneur. I dropped out of college when I was 19 in the mid 90s and started an internet company. And I like to say I've been radicalized 3 times. The first time I was radicalized was during that startup period, realizing that we don't have free markets, we have a crony system. I met with 150 VCs, met with Wall Street, did the whole thing, and it was disillusioning how that process worked. Sold that company, started my second company in the healthcare space, and my view at that point. My view at that point was venture capital and a lot of these Wall Street is not. It's more venture socialism than it is venture capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
So when I started my second company, I wanted to make sure I didn't need to have that kind of institutional investment. I wanted to start something that solved a very specific problem, but in a way where I didn't have to bring these people in. And so started a successful healthcare company that rewarded people for improving their health. And it was torn apart by Obamacare, Dodd-Frank, and Attorney General Eric Holder. And I wasn't targeted like we see now with a lot of businesses that are actually explicitly targeted. I was just collateral damage. Mm-hmm. So I walked away from that. My second radicalization, thinking, well, government's incompetent. So, maybe we can fix government. So I moved to New Hampshire as part of the Free State Project, which is a movement to get 20,000 libertarians to the state and make it basically the liberty bastion on Earth. Mm-hmm. And got heavily involved with my wife, who was also heavily involved in politics, and we were working on getting people elected. Got hundreds of people elected at the local level. And then kind of realized how politics does not operate at all from the bottom up, and realized that politics, it's not incompetence, it's actually malevolence. Mm-hmm. But the way that it works is through kind of this system of organized incompetence, where there are a few people at the top pulling the strings, and the people that are in it have this kind of structure and set of incentives where they may even think they're doing the right thing, but they're not. And so I learned about Bitcoin through the Free State Project in 2012 and through Ian Freeman. New Hampshire was, maybe still is, one of the per capita, the heaviest use of crypto on the planet. I mean, we had shops and restaurants and Bitcoin meetups, and the Free State Project itself would accept Bitcoin and cryptocurrency for events going back 13, 14 years ago. Mm-hmm. So that's how I learned about it. And then I started using it as an actual currency. So in 2012, when it was a magical experience to use Bitcoin the first time. And so I would use it locally. I would even use it in political activism. I raised cryptocurrency in 2014 for a super PAC. And then we actually paid volunteers in crypto. So we were kind of like, hey, yeah, this is money. We're going to defeat the state and get rid of these bankers and central authorities and everything else. And then in 2017, I stopped using Bitcoin in 2017 when it became unusable for its original purpose, when all of a sudden the fees were $50 and it would take 7 to 10 days to complete a transaction because they decided to not increase the block size. And so that's when I kind of shifted away from that. I'm not completely out of crypto. And in fact, I mean, this is a common theme kind of across the board, which is that technology can be used for tyranny and technocracy, or it can be used for for freedom. Unfortunately, 95% of the time we get the technocracy side of it, but what I advocate for are the freedom elements of it, which is true in AI as well. So I mean, I use like privacy coins like Zano and Freedom Dollar, and Zano allows you to create privacy tokens. You can tokenize assets with the same kind of privacy that you have for the underlying privacy coin itself, which is a very important technology. In fact, it's kind of the opposite of what the Clarity Act is all about. But I also like gold and silver and these alternatives. And in the AI realm, obviously big AI, Chat GPT and those types of things are centralized and trained on horrible data with ill intent. But you can use something like Mike Adams' AI that he's created, BrightU.ai, which is open source and something you can download and have on your own device without even being connected to the internet. So I haven't given up on technology, but it's hard because it's nuance. So a lot of people are just like, well, all cryptocurrencies are bad, all AI is bad. And it's hard to get the nuance, and it's also difficult because most of it is bad.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's actually something that I've always been kind of curious about, because I know there are like privacy options, like Monero is another one that I see that's kind of pushed around a lot. Recently, they were in the news for undergoing like an attempted 51% attack by some really large miners.
Yep.
Do you know if there's like ways for some of these privacy coins to maybe prevent that, even through like like malicious investment into it, to sort of dictate governance?
So this is why I actually stumbled onto Zano. Zano was actually created, one of the lead developers of Zano created CryptoNote, which is the technology behind Monero. So he's like an OG that effectively created the technology behind Monero.
Hmm.
And he didn't like some of the elements of Monero and saw a different path forward. So Zano has what's called a hybrid proof of work, proof of stake. So basically every other block is, one block is proof of stake, one block is proof of work, roughly.
Hmm.
And that actually makes the network more secure. And it's now moving towards complete proof of stake this year, but not proof of stake in the way that people think, or that I thought. And and a lot of people, myself included, everybody referred, Bitcoin is always the reference for everything. So if somebody starts a new project, well, how is it different than Bitcoin? If it's different than Bitcoin, it must be bad, right? So a lot of people have this proof of work is the only secure way. Well, proof of work actually doesn't make any sense. And in fact, even Bitcoin itself, now that the price is crashing and miners are going under and everything else, the 51% thing, state actors could pretty easily impact the 51 attack, could do a 51% attack even on Bitcoin if they were so inclined. So, but the way the proof of stake works with Zano is it's not like Ethereum where you have to have a whole bunch of it, right? So Ethereum is kind of like a Federal Reserve system where the only people that can actually participate in this proof of stake system, you have to actually stake a large quantity of it. Well, that's no different than the existing system. With Zano, you can stake and earn rewards regardless of the number of coins you have. But the other unique twist that they have on it is it's a privacy coin, and it's also private with respect to the staking. So one of the problems with proof of stake is if you can see who's staking, then you might be able to influence those actors, right? So this is a real issue. So this is why I was really intrigued by Zano, because it's Monero, but with a different consensus mechanism, and you can create tokens and tokenize other assets, which is actually a bigger deal than most people think. Money only represents about 5% of global assets. It's real estate, stocks, bonds, commodities, gold, silver, everything else that makes up the other 95%. So you can now privately tokenize these other assets and trade them without third parties being able to track or censor. So that's why I'm bullish on that particular project.
See. Yeah, I'll be honest, I haven't actually personally looked into it. I know obviously with the proof of work comes the danger of the miners, especially what is it, Foundry and Antpool. Both I believe Foundry is in active collaboration with like World Liberty Financial and the Trump administration, and everything that they're doing as well. So it's it's one of those things where it's like it's difficult to kind of find like the Goldilocks area of, what is a good combination of both that still prevents, getting attacked from both sides. So I'll definitely have to check it. You said it's called Xano.
Zano, Zano. Yeah, I really encourage you to check it out. Roger Veer introduced me to it. I learned about it when Roger was on my podcast in April of 2024. I mean, he literally just said as a comment at the end, "Hey, you should check this out." And so, well, Roger introduced me to Bitcoin in 2012. I'm like, all right, well, generally, I have a very high opinion of Roger, so I checked it out, downloaded a wallet, started playing with it. And I've been involved with tokenization for a long time. I was, involved with a blockchain called Ravencoin, not officially, but it was a project that I took a lot of interest in. And because I knew tokenization was going to be a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And when I downloaded the wallet and saw that, for instance, you could swap tokens. I could send you a token, so let's say I had silver tokens and you had gold tokens. I can swap tokens with you through the wallet without a third party. And just being able to do something like that is actually huge when you extrapolate. You said you like the barter system. Well, I mean, this is an interesting way of, people being able to tokenize their own assets and trade them peer to peer without third parties. That it has big implications. And so then I read the white paper, then I talked to the team and started using it. I'm like, wow, okay. Understanding that technocracy is the threat and that CBDCs are the control system, this seemed to be the best thing that I've found as kind of an alternative to that, because it's a currency in its own right. I'll give you an example of two things that have been built on top of it that are interesting use cases. There's something called Freedom Dollar.
Mm-hmm.
So we all talk about these stable coins, and when we see the Genius Act, which I've been by the way, you mentioned the fact I've been one of the only people out there against this, which has been mind-boggling to me until I realized, and I did the research and found out that most of these crypto publications are funded by crypto firms that benefit from it. So this article that I have coming out, I did an analysis, 33 articles for Genius, 0 against. No one even talked about the surveillance aspect of it. And it's because if you think legacy media is bad, crypto media is even worse. There's no pretense, there's no objective journalism at all. Even back in the ICO days, you used to be able to pay their writers to write an article about your ICO, but it would be presented as journalistic content. It wouldn't say sponsored by. It wasn't positioned as an ad.
Yeah.
So then I dug further and I found out, well, how is this post? Why does this post have 1,000 likes? Are there really this many people out there in the public actively cheering on crypto legislation? It seemed weird to me. And then I found that there were like 100,000 new accounts created within 24 hours of the first introduction of it's all fake. So you have biased media. And then you have fake traffic. So I don't actually think there are that many people out there that aren't being paid that frankly know anything about it, let alone are strong advocates for it. But back to what I was saying, Freedom Dollar is what's called an algorithmic stablecoin, and it's a privacy algorithmic stablecoin. So one token equals $1. It's backed by over-collateralized Xano, and you can't seize it, you can't freeze it, and you can't track it. So that's one application of a token on Xano. The other is something called confidential layer, which actually allows you to take your transparent blockchains like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Solana and bridge it into Xano. So essentially create a tokenized version of those blockchains and then spend those privately. So those are just two of the applications. And so I encourage you to look at it. And again, I'm not hyping it. I'm not saying go out and buy it. I'm saying research it as an alternative to technocracy. I look at everything in terms of what's the technocratic threat and what's the counter, and that's what my passion is around Xano as a solution.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm sort of what I would consider like a neo-Luddite outside of the fact that I'm using the internet to kind of try to warn people about technocracy until it gets here. Yep. But I definitely will take some. I may even do a stream on it where we just kind of dig into it and things like that. If you happen to catch that and you want to drop me some info or anything, or if you want to do a follow up for this after I've done my research and stuff.
Sure, be happy to do a follow. But I also like gold and silver. This is a gold back, so I don't know if you've
Yeah.
seen these, but I love these gold backs. So I don't want. I'm not a maximalist of any kind. I'm a technocracy
Yeah.
minimalist, I guess. Yeah, I would say, and look for alternatives. But to me, at this point, if it's in the crypto space and it's not privacy based, it's
Mhm.
useless.
Absolutely.
That's kind of my starting point.
If anything, it's even a detractor because it all it's doing is pulling you into that same, Rothschild banking by proxy system that we're in now, but hyper accelerated with autonomy and digital, transactions.
Well, you mentioned that. It's just, if you mention Roth, even 90 days ago, if you mentioned Rothschild, immediately somebody's like, oh, this is a conspiracy theorist,
Hmm.
right? And then the Epstein files come out and there's an email and it's like, oh, yeah, he got paid $25 million on one deal, on
Yeah.
just one engagement to manage something for the Rothschild. And then there are other emails where he's talking about investing in technology companies on behalf of the Rothschilds. Like we're
Right.
actually getting to see behind the kimono here, and it's validating a lot of what it's validating what a lot of people have been saying, but it also in some ways it's even worse. These things never end up like, oh, it's not as bad as I thought. I've yet to have that experience. I don't know about you.
Absolutely. Yeah. I have the motto that whatever they're willing to tell us, multiply that by 5, and that's probably what's actually happening
Yep.
behind the scenes. Seems to be a little more accurate.
Yep.
Um, so as far as the story behind Bitcoin, obviously, Satoshi's the huge focus of that. I have my own theories as far as that goes. I don't think that there is a Satoshi as described, by the Satoshi drops and things like that. But I do know that Adam Back, Hal Finney, and Nick Szabo were very, very influential in sort of getting that story to circulate. And, obviously now with some of these Epstein drops talking about him, having investments with like Adam Back, for example. I think that there's way more to this story than people have been given, obviously at face value. Even people that have done investigative work behind Satoshi, they're operating on limited information. And really it's kind of seemed like a giant wild goose chase. And I would love to get your opinions on what you think the actual inception of Bitcoin was, and then we can maybe go into like describing how Epstein and some of these venture capitalists sort of infiltrated it and took it over and sort of co-opted the entire thing.
Yeah, I've been all over the map on this. So, I mean, early on, I was involved in Bitcoin, and I thought it was this, liberating technology that had positive intent, and then it's kind of like, all right, well, it was hijacked. Well, I think it was hijacked, but I'm not sure if it ever had a positive intent. And I spent a lot of time. I went down the Craig Wright rabbit hole
Mhm.
and the BSV rabbit hole. I spent a lot of time looking into all of this, and I'm thoroughly convinced it's not Craig Wright. But at this point, I think the fact that Bitcoin is transparent and was always transparent is problematic. I think the
Mhm.
fact that it wasn't privacy first. Now, one of the last things Satoshi said in the discussion boards was, we should look into privacy, or maybe we should have looked into privacy. So I'm not entirely certain about the origin, but the bad actors got involved really early, and the story is still unraveling. So whatever it is I think I know now, I don't claim to have all of the pieces figured out. It's
Mhm.
just we now have kind of one or two more layers in to what happened. And I wrote an article about this a couple of years ago suggesting that based on circumstantial evidence, I believe that Epstein was involved in hijacking Bitcoin because he did one media interview only where he talked about this issue. I believe it was in 2017 or something in Decrypt magazine. And he said, Bitcoin is not a currency, it's a store of value. And he didn't say it. He actually had kind of a longer way of saying that, but that is
Mhm.
effectively what he said. So it's the only thing that he said on the matter. And this is a time where he'd funded MIT's multimedia group,
Mhm.
which had this digital currency initiative. And this was right around the time when the Bitcoin developers, which had previously been funded through a nonprofit called the Bitcoin Foundation, all of a sudden That group imploded, and now MIT was funding these developers. So I put out there that I think there's a reasonable bet that Epstein funded some of this. And what was worse about it for me was that the same MIT group funded all 3 U.S. CBDC pilots.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of people that with these bills and everything that came up and the anti-CBDC Surveillance Act or whatever it was. I remember when that was going on and people were saying, well, we should have the ability to at least, I think Maxine Waters of all people was saying, well, we should at least have the ability to research a CBDC. And I'm like, you were the chair of the finance committee when the Federal Reserve implemented and tested 3 CBDC. What do you do you really, I don't know if she actually just doesn't know, or if she's just completely lying. But so the thing is, so right at this time where Bitcoin was in 2017, people were using it as a currency, like retailers like Overstock.com and Expedia and Microsoft. And that was what was causing a lot of the excitement, and that was causing the price appreciation. And then all of a sudden they decided we're not going to increase the blocks. It becomes slow and expensive. And then this narrative shift, and this is the only time Epstein comes out and talks about it. And this is the exact time when MIT comes in and funds the developers to cement this digital gold narrative. So I put that out there as a circumstantial case. I didn't say I know this definitively. I said what I knew and what I did know. And now it wasn't even this most recent drop. It was the House drop from December that showed definitively that Epstein funded specifically these developers. I mean, they're even named in there. There's got Corey Fields. There's Wolf Vander or something or other. Like he literally funded the developers out of this whole process. And so I'm like, okay, well, now that's interesting. Then we find it gets even deeper, and it's all interwoven with Tether, and it's all tied to a guy named Brock Pierce, who seems to be a common thread through all of this. And so Brock Pierce, I didn't meet Brock Pierce, but when I had my first company, and it's very interesting that it comes back to this. I'm in the late 90s, and we were going to do an IPO, an initial public offering, and we had picked an investment bank. It was this firm, Lazard Frere, which is a fancy investment bank in New York. And we were going through the process of getting ready to go public. And we were going to be the second internet company that investment bank ever took public. The one before it was a company called Digital Entertainment Network.
Yep.
And Brock Pierce was the CEO of this. Well, it turns out there was some scandal around sex trafficking in young boys and everything else. The company blew up, and the founders fled to Spain or Portugal or something like this. And it completely blew up our IPO because now the investment bank that we were working with has lost their credibility for having backed these guys. So this is my first introduction to Brock Pierce. And so then Brock gets involved with some other things, a gaming company and whatever, but then gets involved in Bitcoin early. And I don't even know his origin story of getting involved in Bitcoin. Not that it's surprising as a tech guy, gaming guy, per se, but he starts advising Jeffrey Epstein, meets Jeffrey Epstein at an event on an island, not Epstein's Island, in 2011. And he starts, we now know, advising Epstein on crypto. And I mean, really advising Epstein, like to the tune of, I believe there are 2,000 emails back and forth between Pierce and Epstein. And keep in mind, this is just email. Like this, we know that Epstein had Signal and he had WhatsApp and he had all these other things, right? So it's like, so if this is what we get from email, can you imagine what the Signal communications were here?
Insane.
So we now know that so early on, Epstein was all over Bitcoin. Epstein was talking to Gavin Andreessen. He was trying to talk to, I can't find out if he actually met with him or not, but Amir Taki, who I've met, who was one of the early Bitcoin developers. So he was very involved from the beginning, and he was also brokering investments. So it turns out Epstein invested $3 million in Coinbase.
Oh, wow.
When Coinbase was a $400 million company. So this just came out yesterday. And what's interesting about these emails is what they show is obviously what Epstein was good at is money laundering. And so if you're money laundering, it's not like he's putting his name on the stock certificate, right? So it's not like, hey, I'm Jeffrey Epstein. So you get to see in the emails how he's doing it. So he funded the Bitcoin core developers through MIT, right? And this was all done in a way where, they were hoping to not get caught. I mean, it was hoping that the whole hope was that no one would ever find out that Epstein gave any money to the MIT. When it was found out, the guy Joey Ito had to resign. But then Epstein invested in Blockstream, which is the company that you mentioned Adam Back started. Adam Back was one of the early core developers, and he started a for-profit company, Blockstream, that profited on Bitcoin being kind of throttled at 7 transactions per second. They create these second layer solutions, and we knew that they had investors that were tied to traditional finance. The chair of the Bilderberg Group, who was also the CEO of AXA Financial. I mean, we already knew that this was a traditional bank. This was basically the financial industry capturing Bitcoin. Like, this was already known. And Roger Ver talks about this in Hijacking Bitcoin. What we didn't know is that Jeffrey Epstein invested $500,000 in Blockstream. And in fact, I just looked at the timetable on this for an article I wrote. He invested $500,000 in Blockstream before he invested in MIT and what I'll call the hijacking of Bitcoin.
Oh,
so
wow.
he put the money in Blockstream in advance, and then they took over the funding of the development of Bitcoin. So,
wow.
But then it gets even more interesting. So if you're going to shift the narrative and say that Bitcoin isn't cash, it's not currency that you use, it's store of value. Well, people will only buy that argument if the price goes up, or if at least it holds its value, right?
Yeah.
So in 2017, when it became clear that the block size wasn't going to increase, retailers stopped taking Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And the price started to drop. Well, all of a sudden, it turns out the University of Texas at Austin did a study, and they found that 50% of the price increase in 2017 was due to Tether. Now, Tether is a stable coin that Brock Pierce was one of the co-founders of. And Tether has been, well, actually, I can't say found guilty technically, but both the CFTC and the Attorney General of New York investigated them, and they ended up coming to a settlement. And it was found that Tether didn't have the reserves to back their coin. So in other words, if I'm saying I have a stable coin that's worth $1, but I only have 20 cents worth of assets backing that, then it's kind of fraud, right? So it's basically, they've never been able to pass an audit. And they've already had these 2 instances where they were fined heavy for not actually backing their coin. So in 2017, what we have is Tether basically printing coins out of thin air and using that to pump the price of Bitcoin by 50%. In other words, had that not happened, people probably wouldn't think of Bitcoin as being a store of value because the price would have gone down.
Yeah.
So they shifted the narrative. They made it so it couldn't be. They crippled it so that it couldn't be digital cash. And then they inflated Tether and pumped up the price to convince people, I would argue fraudulently, that it's a store of value.
And just a little bit about Tether. So it's headquartered in China, I believe, and with Brock Pierce specifically, not only the digital entertainment network stuff that comes up, but his various meetings with him, how close he was to Steve Bannon as well. And then I think it's also important to note like his ties to like the Medici family, and how close he is to like Bukele out in El Salvador, and how we're kind of seeing like this sort of whitewashing of like their, past financial and sexual crimes and things like that, because they are the front men for this like digital financial system to come. And I love that you address the fact that Tether has been artificially inflating Bitcoin's price. I said that on a live stream, I think sometime about a year ago, and somebody was like trying to get me to explain it, and explaining it to people without having like the full information set and being able to sort of draw out this background of collusion between the two. And bringing in like the Blockstream piece of it as well. I think is was kind of difficult for me at the time, but now like looking back, I'm glad that I said something, because that's what I was seeing, just from looking at the chain and the various transactions and everything that was good, like the moving pieces and stuff. So I'm really glad that there are people out there. I'm sure that you have people in your sphere as well that have been screaming this from the rooftops for years. Um, and it's interesting as well now that Tether has just minted that U.S. dollar Tether thing, that it's the USDT, I think.
Well, they're calling it USAT. Well, the story
AT,
actually
that's it.
the story actually gets worse. And this article that I have coming out, I mean, I'm claiming that we're actually witnessing either the collapse or controlled demolition of the economy, and we have people in the administration that are front running it.
Yeah.
And so one key player in all of this is Howard Lutnick. Howard Lutnick is our U.S. Commerce Secretary, but it turns out now Lutnick, people would talk about this and would say, well, yeah, he was Jeffrey Epstein's next door neighbor, but that didn't necessarily mean anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
You didn't want to go through make an association like that, but Howard Lutnick had not been heavily involved in politics, certainly not at a national level at all. In fact, from what I can find digging up evidence, he was more like hosting events for Hillary Clinton. He was not any player in Republican Party politics. So he cuts a deal where his firm, Cantor Fitzgerald, invested $600 million in Tether in exchange for getting essentially the exclusive contract to manage all of the treasuries backing Tether. Now, understand, before the Genius Act, you could have a stable coin, but the stable coin could be backed by anything, or in the case of Tether, possibly nothing. But if as long as you had, you could use gold, you could use silver, you could use land, whatever it happens to be, just as long as you had enough assets to be able to maintain that peg to $1, you would be fine. Well, Lutnick comes out of nowhere, invests $600 million, gets the contract to manage treasuries for the largest stablecoin, then gets involved in the administration as the head of the transition committee. So in other words, his role is to help select the cabinet, then tries to push himself into the role of Treasury Secretary. So I mean, think about how bad this is, right? Like, my company's managing treasuries, I'm going to be the Treasury Secretary. And so I think even the Trump administration looked at this and said, hey, this is pretty bad by our standards, right?
Yeah.
So we end up getting Commerce Secretary, but still pushes the Genius Act, and bring in this guy, Bo Hines, who I've talked to people that have been in crypto for longer than I have. Bo Hines has never had any involvement in crypto. He has no background in crypto. So he comes in to be a White House crypto strategist policy guy. He pushes the Genius Act. The Genius Act passes, and then he immediately becomes the CEO of Tether USA.
Wow.
So the biggest single beneficiary of the Genius Act is Howard Lutnick. Now, here comes the interesting question. How did Lutnick get involved with Tether? And when did Lutnick get involved in Tether? And he has his explanations that he gives publicly. And in fact, he says, listen, I haven't talked to Epstein. I was disgusted by Epstein, so I haven't talked to Epstein since 2006. Well, these emails come up, and it turns out that Lutnick probably visited Epstein's island. There's a back and forth where it's like, okay, Lutnick is going to take his yacht and all of his kids and another couple and all of their kids, and they're going to go visit Epstein on Epstein's island. Yeah. There's another email, and we don't even have all the emails yet, of Epstein donating $50,000 to an event in support of Howard Lutnick. So they clearly had a connection. Brock Pierce was the co-founder. Brock Pierce was advising Epstein. Epstein knew about Tether from the very beginning. I suspect, but I have no way of knowing, that Epstein is an investor in Tether, again, through some other organization. And then I'm pretty sure Epstein and either Epstein introduced Lutnick to Brock Pierce or whatever, but that's how that connection was made. And so now, people will talk about, oh my God. Yeah, I still see memes about Nancy Pelosi doing insider trading.
Yeah.
This is a whole new level of corruption when you are essentially creating policy to create a digital dollar, and you are carving out an exclusive for yourself in advance of actually drafting the legislation. Like, it's just mind-boggling how just
Absolutely.
boldly corrupt this is.
Well, too, like, it kind of harkens back to like what you had said about Jeffrey Epstein's approach, where they are creating the, I guess, like the, destination for all these people once they push them off of fiat currency,
Yep.
in the same way that he did with the blockstream and the store of value transition. Like, he had the solution in place and then started driving everything towards that. And I think we're seeing that now. And honestly, like, I've described what's happening with like the tokenization of everything, according to Larry Fink, and the stuff that's coming up with the Genius Act, like them just being able to essentially make themselves into their own bank and mint their own coins, and everything like that. It feels like the largest financial coup in human history is on the precipice. Um,
Yep.
because it's the global GDP. It's not just, one company or, one network. It's all money everywhere. And I don't think people understand that.
People don't. I've tried to talk about tokenization, and usually it's blank stares. I've written pretty lengthy arguments about it, or articles about it, and so, well, the way I describe it now is, again, the Genius Act is all about tokenizing money. It's
Hmm.
basically adding CBDC level surveillance, because the central bank doesn't have to be involved. In fact, it's the government that's behind financial surveillance, not the Federal Reserve. So the know your customer laws and the anti-money laundering laws and all the surveillance and the suspicious activity reports, that isn't the Federal Reserve's idea. Those are burdensome costs for the Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
Congress passed all of those laws. Now, through the Genius Act, we get that level of surveillance, but now it's applied to private companies.
Hmm.
And so now these stablecoins are popular. There was $33 trillion worth of stablecoin transaction volume last year. That's more than Visa. Like, this is a
Yeah.
real big deal. This is so I called the Genius Act a backdoor CBDC. But you may be listening to this and you say, well, you know what? I don't even care about this because I don't have any crypto. It doesn't matter. The way you should look at tokenization is they're changing out the plumbing of how all transactions happen.
Hmm.
And they're moving from the current system, which, by the way, uses technology,
Yeah.
uses
Like
centralized
Swift and
databases.
yeah.
And now they're making it a surveillance layer. So your 401k, your ETF, your stocks, you don't have to get a crypto wallet. The way that those are going to be traded is going to be through a blockchain and through a tokenization system that they can program and track and censor. So this affects everybody. And it is not about cryptocurrency, it's about trade of
Yeah.
any kind. So the Clarity Act is the worst invasion of our privacy and the biggest surveillance bill since the Patriot Act.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's coming up on the vote too. Like, the 1-2 punch behind those things, it is extremely concerning, especially like when I've sort of mapped out a little bit of like what I've been seeing, just like when you take into account like the digital ID and free speech laws and things like that that have also kind of been, getting rolled out. And I think it's incredibly important. Just looking here, so like, the Genius Act officially legitimizes stablecoins, standardizes the regulations, permits cryptocurrencies to function as their own reserve private bank, creates the one-to-one backing of dollars and treasury bonds with them, facilitates adoption and use of cryptocurrency, requires monthly composition of reserves to be reported to the government.
Yep.
And then with the Clarity Act, placing the crypto regulations in the hands of the CFTC, moving away from the SEC, and you start bringing in like the Kids Online Safety Act, the Digital ID, the push for like KYC on every single exchange, Operation Stargate, and how we've had the massive building of data centers, investment into AI and the mining that's happening as well, but also bringing in like the anti-Semitism laws and free speech laws and moderation that's happening on social media as well. So if you don't mind, really quickly, just sort of breaking down the sort of the different aspects of the Clarity Act and what that will do for like a day in the life of the average person?
So there's what it does now. This article that I wrote, it's really long, and the reason that it's really long because it's not just about explaining what's in the bill; it's explaining about how the bills work
Hmm.
and the history of financial surveillance in this country. Because it's only gone one way. We didn't have prior to 1970, we didn't have know your customer laws. You didn't have to report all of this stuff. You didn't have to give biometric information. There was no reporting going to the government. So this started in the 1970s, and then it's ratcheted on up. So the Clarity Act covers it right now. It covers digital assets, but the actual intent of it is, as you mentioned, Larry Fink has said at Davos, like whatever it was, a week or so ago, everything will be tokenized.
Yeah.
So it will include what are called real world assets. So this isn't about providing clear rules of the road for crypto. This is about paving the way for the regulation of all assets using blockchain technology. The Clarity Act started out in the House, and it passed in the House last year, July. I don't remember the exact date.
Roughly.
And then it went into the Senate, and now there are two versions in the Senate. So the Senate is fighting over who's going to have control over what. And in the Finance Committee regulates the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. And the SEC is what provides regulation for stocks and bonds.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have the CFTC, which is in the Agricultural Committee. So, commodities like grain and crops and so forth, but also oil and gold and silver and so forth. And so the CFTC and the SEC already, regulate markets in those respective areas. And now there's a battleground about what you should do with crypto.
Yeah.
And so, and they're kind of like splitting up. Well, if you're talking about, if it's something involving interest, then that might fall under one regime. But if it's something that looks more like a regular commodity, this fits over here. So it's turf wars. And so in essence, what's happening, what you have to understand is at the end of this, the only people at the table drafting this legislation, and there's been $100 million spent by lobbyists, and it's the banking lobby and then like a handful of crypto firms. Mm-hmm. And it's only the big crypto firms like Coinbase, who we now know had Epstein as an early investor. Yeah. They want the regulation so that they can lock out their competitors. What the regulation is going to do is it's going to say, if you're going to buy or sell crypto, you have to go through a regulated entity. And those regulated entities have to have all of these certifications. What it says is transactions will be tracked in real time for 5 years. They will keep an entire history of all transactions for 5 years, and the ability to reconstruct the trade. So not just I bought this at this point in time, but to see, I bought and sold this, to see the whole path of what your transactions were. Then included in this is an automatic kind of sharing of this transaction information amongst multiple departments within the United States government, but also the sharing of this financial transaction information with foreign central banks. Mm-hmm. So in other words, this makes it so that only a small group of well-funded players who can afford to pay for the regulation will be able to offer these exchanges. They will be highly regulated, and all of our transactions are going to be tracked at a more meticulous level than they are today and shared with third parties, including foreign governments.
Absolutely.
So what the next stage of this is, we've already seen this with ICE, which is the company that owns the New York Stock Exchange. Mm-hmm. The exchanges that are used for buying and selling your stocks, your retirement portfolios, etc., they are going to have to register under this as well. So now all of these rules that have been set up for crypto will apply to your stocks and your bonds and the trading of gold and silver and so forth. And so this is why the Clarity Act is important. Where people are getting snowed over with propaganda is they're being told, well, finally we'll have clear rules of the road for crypto and we won't have all of these enforcement actions. And I would argue if the clarity is that you're in a digital prison, you'd be better off without clarity.
Yeah.
There's nothing positive or freedom oriented about this. We lose financial privacy and we will have higher costs because we will only be able to go through large players that can pay. And by the way, in this process of drafting these laws, these people pay up to $2,000 an hour for lawyers and lobbyists.
Yeah.
No one can afford, only large established players can even afford to be at the table. So we have no representation in this process. So anybody who thinks, there's no one even trying to fight for individual freedom or financial privacy. There's literally there's no one at the table. And the longer the bills go on, the worse it gets, because you have the Democrats coming in saying they want consumer protection, which just is a fancy word for more surveillance.
Yep.
And now the only thing that would break this apart is if the bankers and the crypto firms can't come to agreement as to the pound of flesh that they're going to take from all of us.
Yeah.
If one of those parties gets too greedy and the whole thing falls apart, that's the only shot that we've got. But we're not going to be able to stop it. We're not going to be able to do a letter writing campaign. Right. This is no Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. This is just the reality of how this works. And so in the end, this is how we end up owning nothing. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to go off onto too many tangents, but have you covered the Great Taking at all?
Maybe. I haven't ever heard anything referred to as the Great Taking.
So David Rogers Webb wrote a book, a guy with decades of experience in the financial industry, wrote a book called The Great Taking. And essentially what's happened is since 1994, there have been changes in state law, Uniform Commercial Code, UCC law. And essentially that these are changes such that the next time there's a financial collapse, you might think, hey, I have my retirement portfolio at Fidelity, or I have it at Charles Schwab or whatever. Mm-hmm. And you might think, well, if we have another financial collapse and Fidelity goes under, okay, well, I'll just redirect my retirement to a different broker. Well, it turns out in all 50 states, they've changed the law so that in the event of a collapse, your investments will go first to pay off the creditor of your broker, which in most cases are the four largest banks. In fact, there's even a special carve out for the big, too big to fail banks. So if the economy blows up, your actual retirement portfolio is going to end up in the hands of JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, et cetera, Citibank. So that's happened contractually. And by the way, you know how people will say that BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street own everything? Mm-hmm. They don't. But what they do is they already vote your shares. People have already contractually given their voting rights, because if you're a shareholder in a company, it means you get to vote on everything. You get to vote on all the resolutions. You get to vote on the board of directors, so on and so forth. Well, you don't get that. Otherwise, everybody that has a retirement fund would get a constant stream of paper, right? If you have 100 investments, so on and so forth. You already contractually gave BlackRock and State Street and Vanguard your voting rights. Through these other changes called the Great Taking, you've actually given up your economic interest in the event of a financial collapse where your broker goes bankrupt. So you take basically, so the idea here is you have your retirement fund is essentially a contract, right? It's like an IOU that you have. That is what's going to be tokenized. Yeah. So when I say you'll own nothing, if there's a financial collapse, they will be able to transfer people's assets to banks in a bankruptcy with the click of a mouse button. That's essentially what's being set up here.
So this kind of reminds me a lot of the way that they like packaged the subprime mortgages and then bought and sold those in sort of like an asset class, bought and sold that debt. And so you're saying that to the average person, your entire life savings is merely collateral for these people to be able to pay things off if they stretch the market too thin and end up failing, which I think you and I both know they would ultimately get bailed out, just kind of looking at, history. And it's interesting, like when you bring up like the whole own nothing thing, because one thing that I also see with like this layering of crypto on top of our current financial markets is that it seems to be an effective way to eliminate like black and gray markets from most things, because where it sits right now, if I wanted to take a piece of furniture that I own and I wanted to sell it to my neighbor, we could conduct that completely offline via, cash or some sort of physical good, trade that, and the government will never know,
Yep.
where now my couch has a token ID and I have a wallet ID, and so does my neighbor. And there's no way to show that he is now taking ownership of it without transacting that on the blockchain.
Right.
And so that to me, like, they end up passing regulations that say like, hey, you very much like with your friend with Bitcoin, where like, hey, you're not authorized to be able to transact this, tokenized good or asset. And then whatever sort of legal ramifications come as a consequence.
That's exactly what the plan is. And if you think about it in terms of technocracy, that's exactly the control system that they want. So they'll determine the social credit system, what you can and cannot do. And it's not just, I mean, you'll see people that put up memes that say, well, I said something the government didn't like, and now I can't use my credit card. No, if
Hmm.
you do something that doesn't fall in line with the regime, you lose access to your retirement. You may not be able to start your car. Massey just tried to pass this thing getting rid of this kill switch on cars. I mean,
Hmm.
you have a tokenized car. In the future, they can shut off your car. You won't be able to sell your own assets. You think about something like the tyranny that happened under COVID.
Hmm.
It would be a lot worse if everything was tokenized. They could determine what businesses were essential or non-essential and cut off the non-essential businesses' ability to engage in trade, either accessing the supply chain or being able to buy and sell things like that.
Absolutely. And we've seen things like that, especially with I believe Trump actually just shut off Justin Sun's ability to like transact on the World Liberty exchange, even though he's a prominent investor, and Donald Trump kind of made his SEC investigation go away. And then the other thing that I always like to argue, with people is like the on and off ramps. If you actually consider the fact that, you have to go through one of these like pre-vetted, pre-verified on off ramps in order to, either put money in or get money out. They can, I mean, we saw that with the Canadian trucker protest during COVID, where they just kind of turned off all the on and off ramps. And then nobody was able to then take their money out of this system, and it was essentially held hostage.
Exactly. But even Trudeau had some difficulty in implementing that. He wasn't able to do it with the click of a button. There was still
Right.
some paperwork. But under this system with
Hmm.
Genius and Clarity, literally a pandemic they could put everything on lockdown pretty
Yeah.
much instantly. And so this is the problem that I have. So I actually, when I realized what was going on here, I wrote this book called The Final Countdown, and it's called Crypto, Gold, and Silver and the People's Last Stand Against Tyranny by Central Bank Digital Currencies. And I actually ran for president to raise awareness in the Republican primary
Hmm.
about the threat of CBDCs. And I actually talked to Vivek Ramaswamy. He read my book. We had conversations, and so then Trump came out against CBDCs in my state of New Hampshire the night
Hmm.
before the primary. And so everybody's like, "Oh, you must be, relieved,
Hmm.
right?" And it's been the absolute kiss of death. It's been a complete rug pull because everybody is disarmed. So Trump says, "Oh, well, I've signed an executive order. We're not going to have a CBDC." And people don't understand what's a CBDC or a
Yeah.
stable coin or whatever. They don't think about it, make America great. And then he does the Genius Act, which is a backdoor CBDC. And what I've been trying to explain to people is, if let's say Kamala Harris had won, yes, she might have wanted a CBDC, but she would have done some DEI thing where it's like, we're not going to use these outside vendors. We're going to do a DEI. We're going to build it. They never would have built it.
Yeah.
But in this case, what we have are the biggest technocratic firms on the planet, the PayPal mafia, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, and everything else. They are competent at what they do.
Hmm.
They are smart people. I don't agree with their ideology. And they are pushing things, the very same things that people were protesting against when it was Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates. Perfect example of this is, you mentioned digital ID. People fought Real ID for 20 years.
Yeah.
Real ID was tacked onto an emergency bill. It wasn't even voted on. It was like snuck in there, and states fought it. Like 24 AGs fought it for years. In my state of New Hampshire, we fought. It was a big thing we celebrated, fighting on Real ID. Trump gets elected, and like 120 days in, Real ID is live.
Yeah.
And now, as of 2 days ago, if you fly on an airplane and you don't have a Real ID, so I'm going to get to experience this here in a few days, you have to pay $45 each way for not having a Real ID. And the goal, there are 12 states, I believe, right now, where Real ID is already digital. It's tied into your Apple Wallet. It's tied into your Google Wallet in 12 states. The goal is for that to be 100% by 2027. So, like, where's the outreach? So I've watched people in the United States mock Keir Starmer in the UK for floating that they're going to push a digital ID by 2029, which, by the way, he walked back. They'll like laugh. Well, at least we're not in the UK. And then I'll ask them a question and find out they actually have a real ID and didn't even know they had a real ID. This is the gulf that we're dealing with.
Yeah.
So now we've got backdoor CBDCs. We've got digital ID. Doge was not about cost savings. Doge was about connecting Palantir to federal government databases, which they've done. So they're building this kind of the surveillance system. The AI is pushing through. You know, people are like, oh, Maha. You can either have Maha or medical freedom. You can't have both. They're bringing in wearables and then they're connecting all of the data into an AI system. That is not medical freedom, by the way. That is the opposite of medical freedom. So this is all happening and there's zero resistance.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been horrendous.
Absolutely. And you know, when you start to talk about like the medical freedom and stuff, you start talking about like the Internet of Bodies and WBAN and like the coming like biodigital convergence that's coming, and to understand that like everything that they're tracking and recording right now is being recorded on an immutable permanent blockchain. Like that stuff will be there 20 years from now, as long as, you know, all the infrastructure stays in place, which, you know, with the ties to institutional investments and big tech and things like that, it is kind of hard to see something like that going away. And to even that degree, it's like when it comes to tokenization, it's things aren't just you know, you're not just defined by like your asset anymore. It's the actions that you do. So like when it comes to these prediction markets and things on Polymarket, or when you're on social media, all of these things have an ID too, and all of those play into that as well. When it comes to like the AI Palantir, so you're realistically, like, you have something watching everything that you do every day. The people that you're close in proximity with, the people you communicate with, and it maps out your entire life to be in real time, sort of surveilled and tracked. And I would argue the future is they're going to have real time like reward punishment systems for things like this. And it's, you know, basically you become a digital chess piece for these people, and they can turn your life upside down with the click of a button remotely, and, you know, you don't even have a chance to like physically defend your assets or defend yourself. Especially with, you know, the way things are kind of going, it seems like most of us will be considered guilty before proven innocent, and not really given like some sort of due process for things like these, because it won't necessarily be like a judicial decision. It's more like a, you know, a financial and economic. They could chalk it up to national security like they did with the Real ID thing, which that baffles me. If, you know, Real ID is supposed to be there to keep us safe, but all it takes is $45 to circumvent that. That doesn't seem like that's about security at all, which, you know, you and I know better, but
well, we know better, but everything that you just said is true. And this is the thing where I know you probably we all experience when we're talking to friends and family that are not, you know, up to speed on this. Is like, oh, this sounds nuts. No, look at 6G.
Yeah.
Look at the patents. The Internet Body of Things is not a theory. It's something that a lot of money has been spent on and is actively being built and rolled out. And what you said about kind of the incentive system thing, this is technocracy. The one thing that I have to explain to people about technocracy, and I encourage people to look at the work of Patrick Wood, who I really learned about, you know, when I was researching CBDCs. That's when I really went into his work. He's been studying this for 4 decades. He's been studying the Trilateral Commission. He's written a number of books about it. This is not like somebody saying, well, I think this is what these bad guys are doing. It's like they've got books about it. They have handbooks. They had meetings. They had the point where these technocracy people would meet, and they would all wear gray uniforms, and they had this technocracy gray color. GM would actually created a paint color. Created a paint color for it. This is real. And what you have to understand is, if you're sitting there saying, well, I have my constitutional rights, or I have, you know, property rights, technocracy does not value individual rights or property rights. You have to understand that this is an ideology. So you might start from the perspective of, well, they're not going to violate these things. You have to understand they don't care about these things.
Yeah.
They don't value these things. And actually, AI, as much as I said that there's a freedom versus tyranny aspect, unfortunately, it went from scientists and engineers deciding things to now AI. And to your point about the punishment system, so, healthcare is horrible in this country, and it's not a market-based system. And insurance companies have nothing to do with free markets, and not I could talk about that at
Yeah.
length, but I'll just say this. Right now, there's a class action lawsuit against United Healthcare because, as you were saying, they've implemented a system, an AI-based system, for determining whether they pay claims or not.
Mm-hmm.
And for people that have like Medicare Advantage, it's a 90% rejection rate. Well, guess what? If you have a complaint, if you want to appeal, you appeal to the AI. So now there's a class action lawsuit about this. Now, people might be saying, well, United Healthcare. You have to understand something. The United States government pays for 47% of overall healthcare costs through Medicare, Medicaid, and the VA. Mm-hmm. Starting this year, they are going to begin rolling out AI. So we have this like $200 trillion worth of unfunded liabilities. Most of it is like Social Security and these healthcare programs. They're going to be rationing it using AI.
Yeah.
So just understand this is also coming. So all of this feeds into what you just said. It will be a penalty system, a reward system, and it is a complete control grid. And the only way out of it, you're not going to vote your way out of it. People have to start using alternatives and building parallels. There's parallel systems and parallel economies. I mean, use gold, silver, barter, whatever it has to be, but we have to be outside of these systems or you're completely trapped.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm at the point where it's, I've realized very quickly getting into this that there's no way for enough people to come into agreement on what the issue is and how to go about solving it. Like the forms of collectivism or like some sort of collective revolution, I think is very, very difficult to sort of fathom in this space. But at the end of the day, I always make the argument like everything on this world is a market and it does require our participation. So yes. When it comes to government, that is a market. They need you to participate in it for them to be able to exist and operate effectively. And that's where I always get, so hung up on, people thinking that government's going to change or that, one guy in government's going to change the world. I know you brought up Thomas Massey, I think a couple times so far. I love everything that he says. Actually, he followed me for a little while. I had some issues with like some of the funding that he was getting, through like Jeff Yoss and the Club for Growth stuff. And he kind of, ignores me now, when I ask about those things. But, the fact that he like came from MIT. So it's like, I always have like, I'm probably too much of a purist when it comes to it, but I always feel like better safe than sorry. But like Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's considered like another one of those like anti-technocracy alternative people. And it's like, she owns stock in Palantir. She voted for the big, beautiful bill. And, just the things that are coming out with Donald Trump and the Epstein stuff, and even just disregarding this entire like criminal enterprise of like financial washing and things that are going on. I still see people say like, who's going to take his place and stuff. And I think that the second that everyone understands that government is literally just there to like wage war against you in every fathomable way. And then also they are the ones that like, when you talk about companies like Palantir, like BlackRock and things like this, people need to understand that like government is the thing that gives these entities the authority to operate that way without consequence. Where, if they weren't there and we had somebody like Peter Thiel that was doing the things that he's doing against the populace would have no sort of obstacle or blockade to then, create their own sort of justice system, based on the way that, they're impacted and things like that. So I always see government as like this nexus point that not only does, 90% of the bad things, but everything else that does happen, they just rubber stamp or look the other way or even incentivize.
Yeah. Again, I don't think we can vote our way out. The one thing that I would say about Thomas Massey, and I share your concerns about Jeff Yass and Club for Growth as well. Releasing the Epstein files is in my opinion, that's the big accomplishment that he has. His voting record doesn't matter, right? He's not, this was a thing that when I got politically active, it was like around the time Ron Paul was running, and there was all this enthusiasm, and people had this idea that, yeah, Ron Paul wrote End the Fed, I think, in 2008. How's that going, right?
Yeah.
Like the Federal Reserve is, and then you had Rand Paul, and you had Justin Amash, and you had Thomas Massey. And I think that there was a feeling there that maybe there was momentum. All right, well, it's been like, whatever, 18 years, however long it's been, there's no momentum.
Yeah.
And the situation has gotten to the point where it can't be fixed. And I've studied this. I've done a podcast on this where I've said America 1.0 is over. And I've also said, and I believe this, that Americans are the most brainwashed people on the planet. There was this, have you ever seen the show Newsroom? There's this clip. It was written by the guy that did the show West Wing, but there's this clip from 2012 where the main character is like this news anchor, and he's hosting this political debate. But he's also there participating on a panel, and somebody says, well, why is America the greatest nation on earth? And he goes on this rant and says it's not, and he lists off, where we rank on things. Well, I actually looked for an update on the list that he gave, and he's right. The United States is only number one in the world in two things: national defense and incarceration rate. Like we're horrible on all of these things, but yet how many people do you know? How many of your own friends and family really believe the propaganda? So I've studied this, and I have not been able to find it. I've talked to other people that study this, a nation or an empire that has got to this level of size, debt, and corruption that did a turnaround. There's no example. And by the way, can you imagine the idea? Like, I find it almost unbelievable that the nation was mourning over Watergate. Like, Watergate wouldn't even make the news today, right? Like people commit 3 Watergates a day. I mean, they say the average person commits 3 felonies a day. The average politician commits 3 Watergates a day. But that was demoralizing on the nation. We are at a level of corruption here, so it's not going to be fixed. But I do respect if we do something, if we the people do something with the information. And by the way, it's not even vote. I'm not. Right. But if we take these Epstein files and get more of this information, it's going to map how this works. And if enough people realize how it works, you'll stop believing in voting, and you will start realizing, I've got to take my free will back. I've got to take my agency back, and we've got to build a new system. So I'm with you on none of these politicians are going to solve things. The most a politician could do is expose both sides, but you're not going to go work with these people. You're not going to go, I'm going to reach around the aisle or whatever, none of that. There's a 0% chance of that happening.
And then, with the way that everything's set up, it's, you get in there, you ruffle feathers, you're not lasting more than one term if you even make it to the end of your term.
No, I mean, look at what's happened with Massey. So he pushes on the Epstein files, and then, was it just last week, AIPAC announced a $800,000 media spend against him, which, by the way, that should tell you something. I mean, that's a little bit, disconcerting.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something there. The Epstein thing, I mean, again, once you dig into this, it's like, okay, well, it's pretty obvious what's going on here. I mean, it's not, you don't even have to be, there's no theory making at this point. It's like this guy, Ehud Barak, the guy's like media, like there's no mystery left. There's no theory part of it now. Now it's just blatant in your face evidence. And it's as bad as anyone projected that it might be. Absolutely. Now, what are we going to do with it?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, to your point, is it has seemed like, especially, increasingly so since 2015, 2016, that there's been this, the shoe drop moment's going to be when everything gets exposed and Epstein, all the Epstein files come out. And I don't think that we're going to have that shoe drop moment. Like, even this, it's like they've done the release in stages, and I think that is like a slow conditioning sort of thing. And even now you're seeing like more and more accounts are trying to change the conversation around it, to say like, he must have been really cool to be able to meet with all of these politicians, and he technically wasn't a pedophile, and he had to be really smart. And I can see it for what it is, but I'm not sure, with the way that I've seen, like especially with the QAnon stuff and trying to position Trump as this like freedom hero, there's a very good chance that 10 years from now, people are talking about Epstein in like a positive light. And, it's scary to think that that's possible, but I think that just owes to your point that our brains are fried, man, and it's not just the 5G.
No, it's not the 5G. We have gotten to the point where like in crypto, when you mentioned meme coins, and you're getting to the point where there are people that have committed multiple rug pulls, and people keep on participating
Yeah.
in follow up rug pull. So there's no, we kind of lost any sense of natural law. But that's the stage that we're at, right? This is why you're not going to fix government. And usually, whatever people call this, the fourth turning. I don't know what you want to call it, but you're right. We're at the point now where it's like, oh man, how can I become Jeffrey Epstein? I saw that Andrew Tate was like, it's like, wow, are we really? Is this how we're going to push this now? And maybe that is the case. And by the way, if that is what happens, that's just the next level of demoralization, because once you get to the point where people can commit absolute atrocities in front of your face and then they get glorified for it, or there's no penalty, then what do you have at that point?
Yeah. I would say hell on earth sounds
Yep.
sounds pretty close. Um, and so when it comes to the tokenization of everything, that's actually something I kind of want to like touch back on, because there's been some articles and stuff from people like Whitney Webb who have talked about how they're like tokenizing natural resources, things like water and power infrastructure, forests, and with the coming of 6G, like they talk about blockchain essentially being like the foundation for the entire communication. That brings in, things like smart cities and the social credit scores and things like that. So with the way that it's heading, where do you sort of see, like, if you were to describe like a day in the life of a person in a completely tokenized world, maybe like some of the uh, obstacles, pitfalls, maybe even opportunities if you can find one, to kind of really like paint the picture for people, like what will this do to my life? Because there's so many people, like you said, that they don't have crypto, they don't own it, they have nothing to do with it. Just like with politics, right? Where it's, you might not be politically involved, but politics is involved in you.
Well, I want to say, like, before leading into that,
Hmm.
in terms of what's going on, just the degree to which Trump has been positioned as this populist hero, and in fact, he's ushered in technocracy, I think 5 years ahead of schedule.
Yeah.
Literally, that's how big the gap here is. And the person that you need to worry about is, and it's always been that way, is JD Vance. JD Vance is Peter Thiel's handpicked. He's a puppet.
Yeah.
Literally, his entire career has been sculpted. I've done multiple podcasts on this, but I mean everything from this chance meeting at Yale, and then JD Vance worked for Peter Thiel, and then he had this job as the COO of a biotech company. He has no biotech background, and apparently he didn't show up for work because he was out doing a book tour. That he's changed his name twice, and all these guys follow this guy Curtis Yarvin.
Hmm.
And Curtis Yarvin, I call him the Yuval Noah Harari of the right. They both get you to technocracy. They want you to believe. They want you picking a side, red versus blue, but in the end, they both get you to technocracy. And so Yarvin has been pushing a lot of these things that appeal to conservatives and appeal to libertarians. Things like RAGE, retire all government employees.
Hmm.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, if you and he labels like the cathedral. You have academia and you have media, and these things are horrendous and have gotten out of control, and they're pushing woke ideology. All of that's true. The problem is that underneath, their goal in all of this isn't to reset things to either balance or to restore our rights. Their goal is to replace it with their algorithms, their propaganda, and in particular, yeah, get rid of government employees, but then let's put in AI. Well, I will tell you something. I want to get rid of these government employees and replace it with nothing. But
Yes.
you want to talk about something like a social credit system. We have a social credit system. We have a 75,000 page, 16 million word tax code. What is a tax code? It is a system of incentives and penalties. The only difference between the United States and China is China has an app. I actually think that we probably have more rules and regulations embodied in our tax code. Well, we could get rid of these inefficient IRS employees, and now imagine if they actually enforced all 16 million words of that tax code using AI.
Yeah.
That's not a win. So people have been fooled. They're thinking that they're reducing government and going back to the Constitution or whatever. And in reality, they're ushering in technocracy. One of the other things that's happened under Trump is he signed an executive order for a sovereign wealth fund.
Mm-hmm.
Sovereign wealth funds control 7% of the assets on Earth. So you have a lot of dictatorships and monarchies where essentially the government is investing, quote, on behalf of the people, but investing in stocks and land and so on and so forth. A lot of this in the Middle East.
Yeah.
It's completely, yeah. Go ahead.
So I'm actually glad that you brought that up. One thing that I looked at was the UAE, for example, like their sovereign wealth fund, because they own this thing called like the Abu Dhabi Holdings Company and the Abu Dhabi Development Company. And it's essentially a front because what they've done is they've consolidated all of the private infrastructure companies in the country. So like the railways, the ports, the airports, the media companies, the water companies and everything like that. Now all of that is owned by a company that is owned by the sovereign wealth fund that is run by the UAE government. And you have the NSA director is also helping to sort of direct that fund, owns MGX, which is the cryptocurrency that's partnered with World Liberty Financial. And, when I look at that, I'm like, this seems like some form of like communism, essentially, but with like extra steps.
Well, that's what tokenization looks like. So you asked what does your day look like? A lot of these sovereign wealth funds in the Middle East, they're building 15-minute cities. They're actually following these UN guidelines. They're going for net zero. And by the way, they're a disaster. Whatever the big one is, it's way over budget. They're not getting it done. There are issues with construction. So the one thing that I have to say with this is they might paint this picture, but I mean, this is kind of like a form of communism in a way. We all know how these plans work, relative to the way that they map them out, whether it's the Great Leap in China or, the Soviet Union and their, novel way of rotating crops that creates famine and so forth. Yeah. This doesn't end well. And it's not going to end well here either, but that doesn't mean they're not going to destroy everybody in the process. But the way that I described what a tokenization system looks like is take the 17 sustainable development goals of the UN. And those 17 sustainable development goals include regulating literally everything, the land, the air, the sea, everything. Like where you work, water, food, language that you use. Like that's so think about that as kind of as the elements of a social credit system. So your free will essentially be removed. And this is assuming you make the cut, by the way, because Curtis Yarvin has talked about the fact he's been very, very heavy on kind of there are racial disparities and some races are born to be slaves. And then he's actually said in other cases, people that are kind of inferior or whatever will be in these ghettos with kind of like what Yuval Harari sounds like with headsets or whatever, but you're going to be like partitioned off. So you might be in that camp. But if you're in the other camp, it's not much better. You're literally, imagine what work you do is determined by, AI. And a lot of the people that are driving this, remember, this is a top-down system. But when you look at who these people are, Peter Thiel, Curtis Yarvin, and others, a lot of these are people that have issues with interpersonal skills and actually have issues with humanity itself and are dealing with a lot of personal demons. So it's kind of like Revenge of the Nerds, but like not in a good way. They're taking out all of the frustration. They're taking out all of the hurt and unresolved issues that they have. And then they're using AI to weaponize that and put us into kind of a prison system around it. That's the way I think about what is likely to be kind of pushed through this system. So So you're not going to be able to make any decisions in your life about what you do for work, where you live, all this other stuff. It's all going to be in this narrow box determined by people who I for most people will not agree with their ideology at all.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yet when I talk about like the tokenization of everything, I'll jump to what I think will eventually be the state of things where when it comes to like nanotechnology and being able to like monitor your health system, for example, like they had just to kind of paint a picture of like how we sort of have that technology now is you have the digital ID that goes through Apple. Apple has an Apple Watch that can check like the oxygen levels of your blood, for example. And every time they see that go up, you have to pay a fee.
Yep.
And so they're literally finding ways to like charge you for the air that you breathe. I think that one thing that's going to come with the tokenization is that they will find a way to sort of tie it into the carbon tax credit system that we have going on right now. In the sense that I think that a lot of the like the early or during COVID, there was the Bitcoin mining operations that like they were trying to shut down in garages and various independent miners and stuff. But what that did, in my opinion, was sort of associate this energy cost with the minting of a particular token, and that alone can be translated into if you're you have a child, that's going to cost you 56,000 tether tokens, and then will turn on your ability to be fertile, and then you can have the child and sort of go like that.
Yep. Yeah, and I forgot to mention that this is one of the cornerstones of technocracy. The basis of it is changing the entire economic system from a system based on price to a system based on energy credits. And so that becomes the control system. In the end, and I wrote an article about this, you end up having these CBDCs, you end up with one global currency, and that global currency is tied to energy credits. And Elon Musk has stated this. Elon Musk's grandfather was the head of the Canadian Technocracy Party, and Elon Musk is a technocrat. It doesn't mean just because his grandfather was that he was. He has explicitly stated he is for UBI.
Mm-hmm.
He's explicitly stated that in the near future, cash and currency will be gone. It will be replaced by energy. He stated this. He stated all of these things. He stated we're going to have universal, not basic income, but high income. Mm-hmm. He's literally, the funny thing is, and I don't even know how much of his traffic is real either, because certainly a lot of the rest of this is fake. But based on the string of accounts that he's given, evolved influencer status, you would think that, he's there as Iron Man one day and everything else. He's pitching the same thing that Klaus Schwab said.
Yeah.
But now people are saying, well, now he's a hero. So he stated that Mars will be a technocracy.
Yeah.
So there's no, the struggle that we have with this is sometimes if people haven't heard of any of these ideas, they sound way out there. But then it's like, even when you play clips of Elon, like the one that I think is the best are these people that think that Elon Musk saved free speech and he bought Twitter to save free speech. There's a video of him sitting around a table with 2 or 3 other people. And he said, basically I bought it so that I could rip off WeChat in China. And WeChat is an everything app where you do communications, payments, pay your bills, do everything. That's tied in, by the way, to social credit systems. And he said in the video, basically, I'm going to rip it off.
Yeah. It's crazy because like now we have X banking. He's talking about bringing like various different functionalities to the platform. The fact that, he's basically broken off the old DM system and now created this tokenized messaging system that he claims to be encrypted. So I definitely see like where he's sort of going, and by no means any secret. And I think that where it's sort of lost is that a lot of people in the West, especially, don't understand what WeChat is or how it sort of dictates the day-to-day lives of people in China. I did some work for a company that actually like use some WeChat things for like, so, instead of like Microsoft Teams. And that, I mean, just looking at that and the way that they spoke about that and the level of like transparency and everything that goes into it and the top-down control aspects of it, Like I don't think people understand that, if this is controlling your life and not just at your job. These people were complaining about how it inhibited their job. So I'm wondering, like, you apply this 24/7 to every person on the planet, what that world will kind of look like.
Well, and I want to read it. Musk has said he's heavily influenced by a series of, I think it's like a series of 9 science fiction books that I want to read, because the summary of it that I've heard, but I kind of want to read the books myself. If you've ever seen that movie Wall-E,
Hmm.
where there are a bunch of people, obese people flying around at
Yeah.
the moon or whatever, and they're on these like lazy boy chairs or whatever with their iPads in front. That's actually what his vision. That's his positive vision of this. It's hedonistic. No one's going to have to work. This is kind of the way that he's pitching this.
Hmm.
And so, again, would it even end up being like that? I doubt it. These things have a tendency to fail, but I also don't think that we want people. If people understood the morality of these people and their worldview, no one would cede their agency and free will to these people to make the decisions on their behalf. I mean, I'm not going to take away from Elon Musk that he's built some incredible technology, but he's made a lot of really bad personal decisions in his own life, right?
Yeah.
So he can be great at technology, but we shouldn't be outsourcing our free will. Even if you hold the view that you think he's great at technology, let's take a look at the personal. He took the vaccine, did a whole variety of other things, his interpersonal relationships, the dynamic with is this the guy that you want setting the parameters for the social credit system and for determining what the behaviors are that you will be rewarded and punished for?
Yeah.
I say absolutely not. And the more you study these people, the less you're going to like it. But the challenge we have is, how do you even communicate this when these technocrats control all of these platforms? I mean, this is true. You have Rumble now, which has Tether as an investor. It has JD Vance as an investor. It has Vivek Ramaswamy as an investor. The traffic on Rumble is fake. The statistics are fake. I had somebody, Craig Wenkowitz, on my show, and he actually had a show on there, and he said it's all pay to play.
Yeah.
There's a group of people that determine what gets on the front page. The whole thing is politically oriented, and people think that's a free speech platform.
Yeah.
People think X is a free speech platform, but algorithmically, given that we're such a divided country, his ability to, with just a slight change the dynamic 2 or 3% affects policy.
Yeah.
It changes the outcome on almost everything. So we have this. Unfortunately, we're in the position of we think we're free and we're not, which is probably the most dangerous position of all, because we're not even aware of the problem. And on this, just one other thing I would say, and Mike Adams really informed me on this, and I did a deep dive on it. China is ahead of the United States in 57 out of 64 technology categories. Now, by the way, I think the whole US versus China thing is just a manufactured conflict anyway, because these are technocratic firms. At the end of the day, technocratic firms use patriotism to get the people to basically allow the state to allow these technocratic companies to roll them over. I mean, that's effectively what's going on. But nevertheless, back to how delusional we are. China's ahead in robotics. They're ahead in and they will be ahead in AI by the middle of this year. And most Americans have this like 1980s view of they're dirt poor. And, when I grew up, I was told you better eat all the food on your plate because there are all of these starving kids in China. It's like we have no idea what's going on over there relative to what's going on over here. So we're just out of
Absolutely. Yeah, and to your point, the whole like relenting, agency, free will to these kind of people. One term that I like to bring up when I'm discussing a lot of these people is TESCREAL, which is transhumanism, extropianism, long-termism, and all of these things. And it is essentially like the way that I sort of describe it to people is in the same way that the WEF, says, like, we know what's best for you. We're the smart people. You're not allowed to make decisions for yourself. Very much like we saw with COVID, where, you don't have to, get the vaccine, but it also means you can't go to this store and you can't be near these people and you can't do this. And it's that same sort of, I know what's best for you, so I am entitled to tell you how to live your life. That's
Yep.
what doesn't sit right with me. I've always had a problem with authority. Ask my parents, teachers, every boss I've ever had.
Yep.
Um, and I think that that's what confuses me the most is that the general consensus with a lot of people that I would hope would be able to see this is that they just want to be left the hell alone, and they don't want people involved in their life. And it's really really concerning to see that the exact same message of authoritarianism and world governance and stuff can just get like a PR stint, and essentially just everyone's on board now. And to your point, like they talk about how like globalism's been defeated, but it is just this like thin veneer of nationalism that we're going to be like our own independent technocratic United States, and then Russia's going to have their own independent technocratic Russia, and China's going to have their own, the EU will have their own. But a lot of people don't understand, like once we're at that point and we have those systems in place, all it's going to take is like an update of code, an API, something like that, and they just push through a new build, and we're a one world government with the press of a button.
And that is what the Clarity Act does. The Clarity Act and Genius Act enable that. Before Clarity and Genius, what it was this Project Hamilton, which was going to be the digital dollar, and there was something called Regulated Liability Network, which was a way to connect CBDCs globally. So they've been working on global platforms for interconnecting CBDCs and tokenized commerce. What they've figured out how to do without any resistance is to just take private things and put them under government control, which gets you to the exact same place as if you did them centrally. It's just that it gets there faster without resistance. This is why I say it turns out the last election was about technocracy with resistance versus technocracy without resistance, and technocracy without resistance won, and nobody even understands it.
Yeah.
So we have this year, in my opinion, to get people building parallel solutions that can scale. When you look at what's going on with digital IDs globally, I mean, we're going to have well over half the population on digital IDs by the end of 2026. There are 134 countries representing 98% of global GDP working on CBDCs and now accelerating this. So what the Genius Act has done is accelerated other countries' plans to either do a CBDC or do a similar type of backdoor CBDC. So everything has been accelerated now. And so the challenge for us is how do we get people, because the only way out is for people to actually opt out and to not comply. And we're in a stupor where people don't even think there's a problem because they've been disarmed by the rhetoric. It's really it's very, very challenging and frustrating.
And obviously you've been doing this for quite a significant amount of time. What do you think, in your opinion? Like, let's say one of my viewers watches this video and it resonates with them, and they understand the implications of everything. What is the easiest way for someone like that to kind of go about talking to their friend or their family member or loved one without getting those like weird looks and getting labeled as a conspiracy theory? Do you have any advice for people that maybe helps to snap people out of the illusion?
One thing that I realized, and this is part of just my experience being an entrepreneur and then actually studying how ideas grow. The issue with this is a lot of people are like, you want to hit mainstream. Like there's kind of like you want your normie friends and family to sign up, but usually ideas go through stages where you have innovators with like 2 or 3%, and then you go to early adopters, and then it goes to early majority, and then late majority, and so on and so forth. So you almost have to go through the stage. So what I've realized is, now I keep on going back and forth on this. Like, you can plant seeds. So this is why I write books, I do articles, I do podcasts. Plant seeds knowing that, at some point after they hear about it 6 or 7 times, they might start kind of digging in more. But the more important thing is to find the innovators and the early stage people to build the parallel solutions, because what we're going to need is, by the time they get to that point, and I will say, I think we're getting close to this point. We didn't talk about this, but this new Fed chair that Trump picked, this guy Warsh, I wrote a post about this. This guy was at the middle, like he brought back the team that bailed out the banks in 2008. Like, again, so people are sitting here like this is this populist thing. This guy Warsh was the actual guy who negotiated the bailout of Bear Stearns.
Mhm.
He negotiated the bailout of AIG, the insurance company, and he was there working with Ben Bernanke and Timothy Geithner. And then he's part of this. It's called Group of 30, which is like one of these like groups of central bankers and people. He's actually part of that. This guy is the insider's insider. But I look at this and I'm like, all right, they're putting genius in place, they're putting clarity in place, and they're bringing in the guy that did the bailouts. They're either, again, this is either a controlled demolition or they already know it's too late. And by the way, we really are due, right? All of the assets are in a bubble. The dollar's losing money. The debt's out of control. Like, we are at the late stage. I've been amazed that it hasn't popped yet, but we're kind of at that point. So I look at where we're at that point. And so what I worry about is it's kind of like with COVID, so many people who said, well, yeah, I'll take the shot because I'm going to lose my job. I don't have any choice. You always have a choice. You just have to kind of jump out and reframe and look at it in a bigger context. You always have a choice. But if people aren't paying attention, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, here is this false flag, and your choices are you either take the UBI or you lose everything in the bank. And so then people feel like, well, I made the safe decision for my family, right? They get backed into a corner, but where they can easily rationalize taking that next step to tyranny. So what I've learned from this is when that happens, when we get to that point where it's like that final point of, taking whatever's left, I would argue we've already given up 90%. There's really only 10% more to go. We're already in the digital prison. They just haven't locked it.
Yeah.
We need to have an alternative where we can say, hey, you don't have to choose that. Here's another path. So to me, it's kind of like, it ends up being 50-50 spending my time. I wanted to spend more time building parallel solutions, but I end up getting drawn back in with things like the Clarity Act and so forth, because the Clarity Act is a great way to educate people on what's going on. But if we can build those parallel solutions while planting seeds, so books, podcasts, articles, that type of thing at different levels. And I like talking to different audiences. And my wife and I have gone to 27 states and 4 countries. I'm trying to dial back somewhat on the travel just to balance out things. But I've found that COVID did wake up people that weren't asking questions before. They're still behind, but at least they're asking questions. So there is that, like, that's that next rung of early adopters, or maybe kind of early to mid adopters. Mm-hmm. Those people are fertile ground. The people that are like 2 or 3, there's this guy, Charles Tardu, had a quote where he's like, if you're talking one level of consciousness away from someone, they find it inspiring, and they're excited about it. If you're 2 levels away, they're bored. If you're 3 levels away, they're angry. And if you're 4 levels removed, they want to kill the presenter.
Yeah.
And I think that actually maps with this, like the stages of technology, adoption. Mm-hmm. And so you want to avoid 3s and 4s. Because if we went on a mainstream, not that we would be invited, but if we went on a mainstream thing, what we're saying is so far removed from people's understanding of the way the world works, they will either get angry or they'll mock whatever it is. And so what you have to do is you have to say, okay, I understand that we're not abandoning those people. We're saying we're going to work on the people that are 1 and 2 levels removed to build the parallel solutions. And then as we get closer to that ultimate decision point, then those people can see what we're talking about with an alternative in hand, as opposed to, oh shit, it's over and you don't have a choice. So that's the best I can come up with. But I got to, the odds are not necessarily in our favor on all of this.
Yeah, I've pretty much made it a point to like tell my audience, like, you're gonna have to save yourself. You're gonna have to, one, sit down and do it like a true accounting of how much you're willing to sacrifice as far as luxury and convenience, all the things that do come with being a part of this system. Like, you may not be able to communicate with somebody on the other side of the world anymore, or like have thousands of people see your posts, but you're also not going to be actively spied on the things that you're thinking and saying and doing. And it is one of those things where, it's so tough to come to a consensus because everyone has their own priorities and things like that I tell people, like, get out as far as you want. As long as you get out a little bit, that is a step in the right direction. It's a drop in the bucket. And focus on yourself, your immediate family, your friends, and loved ones, and just make sure you're good. And, get out as much as you can. And if every single person does that, eventually the drops in the bucket add up to an ocean.
Exactly. Well, this fits. I've launched 6 different kind of websites or whatever. One of them is called ownnothing.org.
Mm-hmm.
And where this started was when I was writing my article about tokenization, I stumbled onto this research that suggested at the time, and this was all the way back in 2004. You know how we sign these click wrap agreements, right? It's like iTunes, Amazon, rental car agreement, whatever it is. No one ever reads them. You just scroll and you click accept, right? Well, based on 2004 information, the average American does this like 100 times a year. And the truth is that if you were to read all of those contracts, it would take 1 hour a day, 365 days a year. So of course, no one does it. Well, I did more research and I found, so I'm like, I'm going to put together a website where you can put in the link to the contract and then it'll give you a score and it'll tell you what you've given up. So you don't have to read the whole thing. You can just see like, hey, this thing's an F and here's, privacy and, ownership and your ability to contest the agreement and so forth. And as I thought about it some more, I realized, well, it's worse than that because we give up our rights without signing contracts. So for instance, in the healthcare field, if you're taking a big pharma product, you are subject to the package inserts, which have all the risk factors and everything, but you don't sign it. It's like this origami thing. The whole thing is fine print. You have to like unfold the thing to read it, but you never sign it, but you're subject to the terms.
Mm-hmm.
So then as I expanded it out, I realized we actually own nothing. You don't own the money in your bank account based on that contract. You don't own, as I said, with the great taking. So I put together Own Nothing, which is a diagnostic that allows you to fill out these surveys, starting first with your attention, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't even own our own attention. The first 7 years of our life, we don't even have any conscious filtering. So whatever we're told, we're kind of building in some, limiting beliefs right out of that.
Mm-hmm.
Then we go into government school indoctrination, 8 hours a day, 180 days a year. And then we have media, and now we have algorithms. Okay, well, once you know that, there's a little survey here. I kind of call it the Are You an NPC? You fill that out, and it's like, oh, okay, I've pretty much given up my attention, which is the most important thing I would argue that we have, to X, to Facebook, to all of these other things. And so like 8 of these different diagnostic tools, and in the end you get a sovereignty score, but the whole point of it isn't to be demoralizing. It's to give you then tips on how you can reclaim your sovereignty. So your point, make decision. What decisions do you want to make? You can make a lot of decisions. One big thing people can do is move. Some people can't. Some people have more difficult circumstances, but you can move. You can get out of these investment vehicles you don't own. You can stop using fiat currency. Food capture is a big one. Do you know what your food ingredients are? That's a really big, and that does actually impact your attention. We are poisoned to such a profound degree with the food system that even affects our attention, our insulin levels, our ability to do a whole variety of things. And so this is one of the kind of 6 tools that we put together to try to help people. And then we're building it out. So I want to build, a network of, obviously people that have alternative solutions to the existing systems. This is just one of the things that I think we can do to help people, because most people, here's what I found. Once you go through this, you come to a moment where you realize you actually already don't own anything. And when you realize that, you realize you actually have nothing to lose, and then you get rid of fear.
Yeah.
That's the most important part. So for me, people are like, I used to live in a 6,000 square foot house, blah, blah, blah. I've stripped down to like everything in 2 suitcases and everything else, because I realized if we are unsuccessful in defeating technocracy, we will all be in a digital prison. So, because a lot of people will say to me, I have gone around the country defending people, friends of mine that are in prison and everything else, and people are like, well, aren't you concerned about doing this? I'm like, if we do nothing, we're all in a digital prison. There's zero risk for me to do what I'm doing. The risk would be in doing nothing.
Yeah.
Because that would have a guaranteed outcome. The thing is, once you do a tool like Own Nothing, once people start to become aware of these things, they realize it. And the way we defeat technocracy is by eliminating fear.
Absolutely. And I think, a lot of it is, they always say like fear of the unknown is the worst fear that there is. And that's why I think the education piece is so important. And I've been trying to operate in this space for just a couple of years now, and it seems that the one thing that has really reassured me that there's not a whole lot that can be done is that all of us can kind of agree in a general sense, like we don't want to be ruled over in a dictatorial, sort of structure. Um, but the it always ends up becoming like some sort of disagreement about like, well, I don't like, the way that you think about this thing or the way that you, and it's like all of that it should come second. Like we have this on the forefront, where it is us versus it's the people that don't want technocracy installed on them or are going to be the eventual victims versus the ones that are building the system and implementing it and everything like that, from government to private to public sector to the media and everything. And it seems that more often than not through history that they're always able to operate in this synergy where we always operate in like a discord where even though you and I probably want like the exact same things, I'll try to maybe like connect with another community or another group, and because I'm anti-government, they go ahead and just dismiss everything else that I have to say, the technocracy stuff, the stuff about crypto, transhumanism and stuff, and so that seems to be like the largest obstacle is that it seems like we can't get over ourselves enough to get along with each other.
Yep.
And I think that does just come from like a general misunderstanding, because I don't have any ill will towards anybody. I think that like these debates that people do and these like I really, it's just like reality TV kind of looking thing, and I just sort of see that as like holding us back. And I don't know if you've ever had this, but there seems to be like a coordinated effort to continually drive even like myself, somebody that like I don't want to be involved with it. But there's like camps that are trying to like nudge me into this so that it no longer becomes about the information. It becomes about the ego, and it becomes about, me as a part. Like, I don't want to be a leader. I don't want to be in charge of anybody or anything like that. And people are still like looking to me, like, what's your solution? And I'm like, well, I have solutions for myself. Really all you can do is equip yourself with the information and the skill set. And then from there, you figure it out. You have your own autonomy, practice your free will. Um, and so I'll say like invest in food infrastructure, teach yourself how to grow your own food, try to secure your own like water source if you can, that's independent of, any private company, find, do the research while you can right now to figure out different ways to like generate energy for yourself. I live in a part of the country that was just like very heavily impacted by like the winter storm,
Yep.
and I was without power for a week. And that,
Oh, wow.
yeah, that to me was like a huge wake up call of like, I realized that I wasn't as well prepared as I thought that I was, for when
Yep.
this does happen. And so I think that's the number one thing is, people should stop giving like all of their money to these like talking head influencers, on Rumble platforms, the Andrew Tates, the Steven Crowders, the all these. I tell people, don't even give me money. Like, you need to save your money, go buy like real world physical assets that you can then use to prolong your life. And I think that's really the key.
I agree with that. There are no white knights, and I agree the same thing. And this is what I always say. It's like you have to be your own white knight. This is about you reestablishing your own agency. And I understand. Look, part of the problem is we didn't. I don't know how you got to where you are in all this, but we all were fooled.
Yeah.
And so that usually it's you have some set of circumstances or experiences that allow you to see what's going on, but it's not like there's everybody's been fooled, and people are at different learning rates and have not had the opportunity to have the experience to see how bad it is to kind of walk through it. And so but most people have been trained to look outside of themselves and to not exercise their free will. And then we've created this culture of white knights, even politicians. To me, the biggest shocking thing of all was after COVID and after everything that happened, which I thought after 2020, it's like we had Operation Warp Speed, $7 trillion worth of debt. Like this is a kind of a horrible situation. We managed to engineer a situation where people thought that the guy that did that was going to be part of the Avengers to come back and fix things. Did you see these Avengers posters? Tulsi Gabbard, JD Vance, like, and I'm looking at this, I'm like, what series of events made people get to that point? So then RFK is going to save it, everything else. Yeah, no, there's no white knight. And the thing that a lot of people, because I do talk about crypto, people make it like, what should I invest in? And then people have concern about AI. The number one thing you should invest in is yourself.
Yes.
Figure out what your purpose is. And if you're not following your purpose, rather than buy an asset and hold on to it, invest in education and tools and resources, whatever it is that you need to do to fulfill your own purpose, and only you can figure that out.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that sentiment, man. I think we're in agreement 110% there. Really quick, I know we're coming up on like 2 hours. I do want to be respectful of your time, but I checked out your Technocracy Atlas website. And if you want, I can share my screen. If you would prefer to drive to kind of show people, you're more than welcome to share as well. But
well, you can pull it up. So I want to say it's undergoing an upgrade right now. So I'll be more speaking to kind of what's on it or how it's going to be rolled out. I started working on this about 6 months ago, and the whole idea on this was, when I was writing my book, it's actually hard. The fact that I didn't learn about technocracy until like 4 or 5 years ago is shocking to me, given that I've been studying these things, libertarian freedom, all of this other stuff. The fact that I didn't even come across this material was mind-boggling, because, this guy, Patrick Wood's been working on this for decades. And then I realized, if you're using a search engine, or if you're using a mainstream AI, this data isn't in there. Or if it's there, if you don't know what to ask for, you're not going to get it out.
Yeah.
So I'm like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to build my own system, my own database. I'm going to download all of the primary source material. So I'm going to take all of Patrick Wood's stuff, all of Courtney Turner's stuff, and Whitney Webb and all of this other stuff, and provide a chatbot, but where the chatbot is not based on a AI trained model. It's actually accessing the primary source material.
Oh, wow.
Well, then it evolved from there. Then the Epstein thing happened. And I said, well, all right, I'm going to take all of the Epstein files. And this was before the latest dump. So what you're going to see on here right now is doesn't include all. It only includes like 5% of the new stuff, because there's 3.5 million documents. But I'm like, what if we crowdsource this? Because listen, obviously it's clear the DOJ and the FBI has zero interest in prosecuting anyone or even uncovering. They've been the ones suppressing this information. Well, people have different skill sets. In fact, there are a lot of people, I don't know if you've seen this. I learned about this recently. Like, it's kind of like this true crime thing, where it's like they're all people all over the place that are trying to solve crimes, and Facebook pages and Discord and everything else, trying to track this stuff down. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to take all the files and I'm going to analyze them, not only through OCR, but I'm going to actually use another AI to not just take the caption of the picture, but to describe the actual picture, so that people can search the images, the videos, the text, and figure out what's going on. And now it's evolved even further to where there's kind of like a photo thing where you can identify the faces, discussion boards, and then we're going to be launching next week the ability for people to do investigations within this Epstein area. So for instance, let's say you wanted to do what's Epstein's involvement with Bitcoin and crypto. Now you can take all of the evidence and all of the information and kind of put it within one project category, and then people can comment on it and the whole 9 yards. So this is essentially how this whole thing has evolved. And so, it may not even work. I'm literally updating it right now. So if it doesn't work, understand. But so it's really grown. So now, in addition to the Epstein files, I have the Pandora Papers. We have the Panama Papers. So if you're not familiar with those, these were kind of all of the trusts and legal documents that a lot of the wealthy people use to conceal assets. Those were leaked, and there was a group of investigative journalists that got together to leak all of that information. So I'm putting all of that data in here. And then right now what I'm doing is refining the user interface, because this right now it's like, okay, there are 95,000. What are you going to do with those pictures? now I'm going to the next level of interactivity and discussion and so on and so forth. So now this has turned into a crowdsourced investigation platform. It started out as just a kind of an AI chatbot for information on technocracy that you're not going to be able to find anywhere else. And now I'm like, hey, you know what? Let's go all in and let's make this a crowdsourced investigation platform. So I'm really excited about this. So if you check back in a week, it's free. All of it's free. There's no, I don't have a business model for this or for the own nothing thing. This is just, I'm at the point, these are the things that, like I said, I'm all in. We either defeat this technocracy or nothing, right?
Yeah.
Whatever it is that you think you have, you'll find you don't when you analyze it. And so we got to come together on this. I think it's perfect timing. I actually think this crypto thing might be the best, but there's so much misinformation in this. I'll give you an example. I saw this, everybody's like, there's an email that shows Blockstream, this second layer Bitcoin company, the founder of that company is saying something to Epstein about, well, we don't like the fact that essentially what it says is we don't like the fact that you're involved with Ripple and Stellar. So we're going to reduce the size of your investment. Well, these Ripple XRP people take this and apparently don't read or understand the thing and send it around saying, here's proof that Epstein and Bitcoin were trying to kill XRP. And I'm like, did you read what it says? Do you understand what this says? It says that he's invested in this and that they're going to pull back the invest. And people, even when you point it out, they won't. So this is the crazy part of it. So from my perspective, as we started this at the very beginning, it's, I don't know who's behind Bitcoin. It may have been bad actors. The only way we will find out is if we crowdsource the information, crowdsource the truth. I'm done. I've been in crypto where I've taken sides on things where I thought one thing was, and I've gone through that enough to know that I can admit that I don't know. I don't know whether this thing started out as a good idea or not. I know it got hijacked, and it was Whitney Webb's, what's his name, her boyfriend or whatever,
Johnny Vedmore.
Like saying, he's like, this is the way that it was always intended to be. It wasn't hijacked. This was the original design. Maybe he's right. Like I'm not going to say that he's wrong on that. Either way, if you are holding the view that Bitcoin in its current state right now is freedom money, that is incorrect. So it was either a good idea to turn bad, or it was always a bad idea, and we're just seeing the execution of the original bad idea. But I would love to crowdsource this because people have information. I know people that were involved in the Bitcoin Foundation. I know people and then I talked to them like, yeah, no one's collected that information. There's no news outlet that's doing an undercover investigation or digging deep into how this works. I've talked to some traditional media. Man, I did an interview with the Daily Mail, and the woman's a good journalist, and she even said, I'm not a financial journalist. It took me like 4 hours to do 2 paragraphs on Howard Lutnick. And it was a great experience for me because then I realized, all right, I'm way in the weeds here and everything else. But it also showed me that most people have not been presented and have no idea what's going on regarding digital currencies or any of this. So anyway, that's Technocracy Atlas.
And I love it too. Like I was going through and I was just kind of looking at like the different timelines for everything that you have, and like this year these laws passed and this is what they did and how it affects your life and stuff, and really just kind of showing that like timeline. Like some of these things have been in place longer than most people have been alive, and once they can kind of understand that and get it in like this one stop shop, like sort of easy to digest, because I think that's really where like a lot of the issue comes with, the gap in the way the world works and the way that people understand the world works, is that the information just is never really been like truly consolidated in a way like that. And I love the idea, like that's kind of the idea behind like my researching live streams, right? Like I'm by no means any expert. A lot of these things are still kind of new to me. Like I knew who the Rothschilds were in high school, but I didn't know who Peter Thiel was until a year and a half ago. And so it's really opened my eyes to see like all of these small anonymous accounts. Maybe they have 300 followers, and they put something on my radar that ends up leading me in a whole different direction that connects to something that I was already working on. And the value that each one of us has in the information that we have and the ability to connect the dots until we are all truly working together. I think there's an untapped potential there that I can't even, fathom, I guess, is the
No,
real
it's
word.
the same. When I roll this out, I actually have I create a lot of AI music. I've got to the point where I like a lot of it. It's just, but there's like a theme song for Technocracy Atlas, and the idea, and realistically, everything is portrayed as a 50-50 battle. It's 8 billion people versus 500.
Yeah.
Right. There are no so if we're talking about something like this, it's like, hey, you can have boomers doing FOIA requests. You can have Gen X working on, scraping web. You can have different generations approaching even crowdsourcing this, and people can work together on it. I think it's a powerful, hopefully it's a powerful tool. But I admit I have to refine it. The big part of the time effort on my part is getting the data and then actually processing the data so that you can then make a UI that works with the data. And that is it was okay when I started out with a small data set. Now, when you expand it to 3.5 million documents, and then what you have to do is you actually have to take, they're PDFs. So then you have to take the pictures, you have to extract pictures from within the PDF, and then you have to classify. There's a lot of just like, mistakes and correction and stuff. And so I'm once that's done, then we're going to go through like the really cool part of working with people to get the UI easy to use and viral.
I love that. Yeah, I've checked it out. I love that A, you don't require logins. B, you don't have ads. Those are two big things for me. So, this is something that if you're cool with it, I would love to pull this up on stream and potentially use it for like my research and mapping and stuff as well.
Oh yeah. The whole point of this is I'm building this tool for other people. The thing that something came to me intuitively this summer, and it's like, what I want to do is create tools to help empower other people to do things. Like whatever it is that I know about technocracy is not important. Whatever all of us can actually contribute to these crowdsource things, that's where it's all at. So I'm like, based on my background and everything else, I'm like, all right, let me see if I can create some tools.
Absolutely. Well, Aaron, is I know we're coming up on, I think, like close to 2.5 hours.
Yeah, I've got to pick up my kids.
Gotcha. I would love to have you back on the channel, do a return conversation, maybe even as things progress a couple months from now or something, kind of see where we're at, or if you get the itch and you feel like chatting again about this or anything else that kind of comes up. Really want to thank you for your time today, your expertise, like your firsthand accounting of sort of a lot of these things too. I think that's a really unique perspective that a lot of people don't get. And just seeing the efforts that's kind of gone into like your tools and your research and your ability to kind of see these things for what they are on a grand scale. I have appreciated this conversation. Really, really have to go thank Indy for making this connection between us. And you're a fan of the channel, man. Thank you again.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And I've enjoyed this, and I would absolutely love to come back. So, and thank you for all the work that you've been doing. I mean, this is how this is going to get done. There aren't many people exposing technocracy, so I really appreciate everything that you're doing.
Absolutely. I'll go ahead and plug your stuff for you. You have the technocracyatlas.com. You have you will own nothing.org?
It's just ownnothing.org.
Ownnothing.org. And then you have a couple nonprofits and stuff that kind of.
Yeah, if you go to daylightfreedom.org, it will actually link to all 6 of the websites. So that's probably the best gateway to remember, so that you can click on all the other links. I've got a podcast that I do every Thursday, and there's some other sites on there as well. Oh, I didn't even talk about OSARA, which is a global medical tourism marketplace. So everybody's, every minute in the United States, somebody files for bankruptcy due to medical bills. Most of those people are insured. So there's a free marketplace where you can shop and actually save 80% going international and get better health outcomes. So that's OSARA.com. So yeah, like I said, I'm working on a lot of things. I like, just to me, the 2026 is it. So I don't sleep a lot, and we're putting it all out on the table and seeing what we can do.
I like it, man. Well, hey, if there's anything I can do to support, help get things out there, I'll be sharing your work and everything like that moving forward. And don't be afraid to reach out. I don't have a lot, but I'm willing to give everything I do have. So.
Well, I appreciate that, man. And I will take you up on that.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks again, and we'll catch you around next time. You keep up the hard work, brother.
All right, you too. Thanks.
Bye.